Good morning, everyone. It gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce my good friend, Jim Barrett, True Transmission of the Dharma. He is a true friend. We meet on Monday mornings and solve the world's problems. Somehow, after we take the notes and send them off to the world leaders, they ignore us, but I don't know what that's all about. Jim is presently more at home, but he's active in helping lead the Southside Sangha. But he's also very good with individual people. He's been a real friend to me and a great joy, one of my aspirants who made it. And anyway, Jim is going to be talking about the fourth of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. It's called Objects of Mind, or Dharma, or how we observe the world. And we thank him very much for his time and wisdom. Jim, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Paul. It's so wonderful to see you all here. Good morning, Tay, my esteemed teacher and dear Sangha. It's wonderful to see you all. It's harder and harder for me to get around, but I'm always so grateful for the technology that allows us to come together. So, as Paul mentioned, I was ordained in October of 2017 at Magnolia Grove Monastery, and I was given the name True Transmission of the Dharma. What we're going to talk about here today is just some thoughts I had, my imperfect understanding of this subject of mindfulness of dharmas. And it turned out to be such an interesting subject for me the more I got into it. But I have no insistence on truth in the things that we discussed today. It's just my imperfect understanding. So I'm a simple peasant, entitled to nothing and expecting less. But how about, just to make sure that we're all here together, right here and right now, we start off with a little bit of deep breathing. If you can follow me or at your own pace, let's just see how it goes. Come back to the breath. In, out, deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release. Stories stopped, judgments dropped. So, when approaching something like this mindfulness of Dharma subject, first off, of course, it helps to make sure we have some definitions. And I've always used I've been using the same definition for mindfulness for years and years. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment with as little judgment as possible. And so that's what mindfulness of dharmas. So then the next question is, what is this word dharma? And man, oh man, did I uncover a bucket of that one. So, but fortunately, they got this thing called the internet nowadays. And my Google Foo is proficient enough that I was actually able to find an article from the Tricycle magazine in spring of 2014 called The Many Meanings of Dharma. And it was written by two distinguished professors, one of Buddhist studies and a founding director for the Center of Buddhist Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. And the other one is a professor of Buddhist and Tibetan studies in the Department of Asian Languages and Culture at the University of Michigan. So we start off with the idea of I don't really want to go too far into the etymology of where this word comes from, but suffice it to say that there are as many as 10 different meanings are enumerated from a variety of sources for this word Dharma. Now, in the 18th century, and this is of course, this is going to show us where we get a lot of our confusion and a lot of the strange things happening. In the 18th century, the officers of the British East India Company were instructed to educate themselves in the points of the Hindu legal system. And they took on this word Dharma. And by the time they were done with it, it meant law. Okay. And we can go on from there. One of the most significant and common uses of the word Dharma is that of teachings or doctrines. But a second and very different principle denotation of Dharma is a physical or mental factor, a fundamental constructive element, or simply a phenomenon. In this sense, each of the individual building blocks of our compounded existence is a Dharma. So here we go. We can either take 5 minutes on all of this and say this business of mindfulness of Dharma means pay attention to the teachings that you got from the Buddha and from your teachers, and hold them dear, take refuge in them, and we can all go home and take a nap. But we could also go deeper into it, and that is this concept of the Dharma as phenomena. Phenomena are by their nature made of parts. Because they're made of parts, they're impermanent. And all things are phenomena, right? I've often suggested that maybe there is something in this universe that is not a phenomena, that stands all on its own. I've never come across it, not even in a thought exercise, but if anybody wants to discuss it with me, I'd be more than happy. But given that everything that we experience, everything that we see, everything in our universe, everything in our world, it's all a phenomena. It's all phenomena. Understanding that phenomena exists and are impermanent helps us to understand both interbeing and impermanence. Mindfulness of the Dharmas means the mindfulness of our lessons, but also how the phenomena we encounter and manifest shape our habit energy and hence our world. The phenomena that we experience on a daily basis the phenomena that we experience is translated and translates both in both directions into our habit energy, and that habit energy helps to create our world. My habit energy is just as real as your habit energy. The world that my habit energy creates is just as real as the world that your habit energy creates. But this business of phenomena, everything is a phenomena. And so when we talk about mindfulness of dharmas, how about the concept of watching each one of these things, becoming aware that we are interacting with phenomena and seeing how does it affect us? How does it affect us in our body and in our mind and in our feelings? So stopping the stories and dropping the judgments allows us to move from the historical dimension into the ultimate dimension. Some folks might consider this state to be nirvana. But the stories and the judgments are integral to our perception of the phenomena. And for all practical purposes. They're intertwined. Again, we're back to the idea of interbeing and impermanence. So, this is one of those things that I find it to be fairly elemental. And if we can get an understanding of this idea, some of the concepts I've had about phenomena one of them, for instance, has to do with sciatica. My doctors call any pain down my leg to be sciatica, and I didn't quite understand about that until I finally understood that this nerve that ran down my leg was all intertwined, and it came from all sorts of places, and it went to all sorts of places. And it was just very easy to slap a name on it. But that doesn't mean the experience. We want to move out of the idea of constantly having to label things, constantly having to tell stories. That's the biggest thing I have to cope with in regards to these phenomena, is the stories that I will tell about them. Our dear friend Mark Twain once said he was involved in countless tragedies in his life, and some of them actually happened. And so we get these folks, what's a tragedy for one person is simply a difficulty for another person, simply because they understand where and how their phenomena are, and their habit energy are going on. So I think I'm done. So if anybody would like to bring up any questions or any discussion, I think we'd be happy to have some.
Good morning, Jim. Good morning. Thank you so much for your beautiful talk. My name is Ro. We've met before.
Oh, yes.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine.
Thank you for bringing in sciatica as a nerve that has only been given a name that somehow or another solidifies it in our minds, much like all of the other stories and words. And I'd love to, I just think that's amazing because of the way in which you described it, which is that it's interwoven with all of these other nerves. And therefore it has an expression or a voice that includes a lot of other aspects of our experience, which I think is so powerful when you think about interbeing. You know, and how our symptoms, physical and mental formations and emotions actually can become our allies when we start to relate to them in a way that you just described. So thank you for that.
Thank you so very much. Right. As with so much of what we're talking about, it starts with awareness. Mindfulness is a sense of awareness, and mindfulness is always mindfulness of something. And in this particular, we're trying to be mindful. Like just as for example, a pileup on the interstate some morning, when with countless hours worth of disrupted lives and maybe even injuries. And it could all come down to something as simple as the truck driver didn't get his yogurt that morning. His wife was busy. She, you know, that's all. And he was distracted. And so he stopped and he got his own yogurt. And there you go. You got a guy out there trying to do something, do something, and okay, so but it can be the smallest thing. Remember the old, for want of a nail, the horse was lost, the whole bit. That's a perfect example of interbeing. And I have a dear friend who is, while we've just been sitting with each other for years and years and years, he's absorbed a little bit of this. And one day I said, why don't we think about the interbeing of these hash browns on this plate? And after a couple of minutes, I looked up at him and I said, what were you thinking about? And he said, oh, I was thinking about the people who ran the cans and created the cans, and the people who put them in the boxes and brought them in. And I said, oh, I was thinking about the wife of the guy that I know is back there cooking this stuff up. And, you know, so we both picked a different thread of interbeing to carry on. And it's indicative. It's indicative of my friend's, I think of his character, or his ideas, and I of mine. So the explorations that we can do in regards to this business with the interbeing and impermanence, but we have to keep always remembering that the interbeing and the impermanence are two major portions of what we do here. And I haven't gotten it in yet, so you know I was going to. What we do here is so important, we must be sure we don't take it too seriously. So I know some of you are waiting for that. So, from our friend Suzuki. So anybody else?
Jim, good morning. This is Colleen. Hi, thanks for your wise words. I do wonder, when you talk about dropping the story or noticing the judgments, how do you know, Jim, when you're encountering a phenomena, if you're experiencing in the next moment a deepened understanding, or if you're embellishing a story?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And it comes in a couple of different directions. Number one, as far as I can tell, I'm always telling stories. And the only time I'm not telling stories is when I'm actively reminding myself not to tell stories, which in itself is a story. But then when I am meditating, and this is very interesting, I just find it fascinating. When I am meditating, if I am attached to my breath, or if I am following my breath in, out, and deep, slow, typically my head will be upright, my chin will be at the place. It's just like we always said when we were teaching in basic meditation. However, as the story begins, my head drifts off to the left. And then eventually, if I don't pay any attention to it, I'm all the way down over here, and I'm telling you, I've got me some stories going. And the first thing sometimes the first thing I notice is that my head is starting to drift off over like that. I would say that in poker, that's what we would call a tell, but the rest of it, I'm working diligently on this. I understand that this is a key to this, the difference between, or moving between the ultimate, the historical and the ultimate dimension. This process is a key to moving from the historical to the ultimate dimension. I believe that if I'm going to, let's see how to put it. My path leads me towards I believe my path leads me towards the ultimate dimension, and my bodhicitta vow. And so it's important that I understand, and that I fall into, I understand this business of the multifaceted aspects of Dharma. So.
Yeah, hi, Jim. It's Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi. You know, I do cat adoptions at the shelter, so people always ask me, what is the story on this cat? And they want to know. And I always say, I can't tell you because it's stray. You're going to have to make it up, you know. So, yeah, but they want that. They want, you know, some kind of detail. I guess my question is just what you were starting to talk about there is the difference between the historical and the ultimate. I don't quite have a full understanding on that. So if you could
Well,
expound some more.
I'm not absolutely certain I do either, but I'll give it my best crack. And anybody who knows better should feel free to correct me. But the historical dimension is that which is made up of all our attachments, our defilements, our habit energies, and all of that stuff. They're the stuff that it's the world that we experience filtered through our experiences and through our preconceptions, whereas the ultimate dimension is sitting, holding, taking in a breath, holding it exactly as long as it lasts, and then releasing it, and then experiencing the world exactly as it is, moment by moment, with as little judgment as possible. That's all. That's the way it was defined to me. I'm perfectly willing to be wrong and always willing to be corrected, but I believe that's the case. And as I said, some consider the state to be nirvana. Now, this business of the stories, man, do we got to have stories. Why do we got to have stories? Because human beings hate uncertainty. Remember some of you will remember the hacked old story I bring out all the time about Bob and Og and the is it a lion or is it a rock or is it whatever, you know? Human beings in their hunter-gatherer stage were so threatened and life was so perilous that they needed, and they developed they developed this desire, this need for certainty. And despite the fact that there is no certainty, we will do whatever we can to make it. We will pretend. We will bury our heads in the. We would rather die than to be uncertain in many cases. So it's the nature of human beings. And if you want to move on beyond that, if you decide that that's not serving your best purpose, which I kind of was realizing that was the case for me, and you start off by paying attention to them. I don't grapple with any of these stories. Mostly what I do is I smile at them. I laugh at them. You know, I get done with my meditation and somebody says, "You have such a smile on your face." And I always say the same thing. If you heard the crap that was going through my head, you'd smile too, you know? It's so we have it all. Okay. So those folks, they need to have a story about their cat. And the fact that I've had cats that walked in out of nowhere into my life, and I've had cats that walked out of nowhere out of my life, you know. So we accept them as they are. Anybody else?
Thanks, Jim. I think Cornelia online has a question or a comment. Cornelia?
Yes, good morning. Hello, Jim.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm not quite willing to give stories such a bad reputation because stories have different qualities. And I think there are stories that we have that are important for creativity and for our imagination. And they can water good seeds in us. And so I think some of the stories are important. And I think when somebody asks, they want to know something about the cat, there is a healthy curiosity and interest at work that isn't necessarily something we want to be certain about. You know, for an artist, stories are important. And they're part of the imagination. And a very important part of the imagination is compassion. It's maybe the crowning event of imagination. And so if I don't have a story about somebody that I need to relate to in a compassionate way, I wouldn't know how to do that. So what do you say to that? Bowing out.
Well, in the first place, I said way up at the beginning, I think I said, this is my imperfect understanding, and I make no insistence on it being truth or not being truth. That being said, the question is always, are the stories are they fulfilling a purpose, or I'm hating it when I'm starting to lose the words as I get older. Are they suiting your purpose? I guess that's the purpose, or that's where I'm going from. But for instance, I could have all sorts of stories about red-headed guys with one short leg. I happen to have stories because he's the guy who fixes my garage door. And I did not like the guy the first time I met him. And I have not liked him since. As a matter of fact, I'm unsure as to why I can continue to pay him to fix my garage door. But it doesn't make any difference. I create these stories, they pop right up. You're right. Where else does creativity come from? As far as compassion, I don't know that compassion has to come from a story. Maybe I hadn't really given that much thought. To me, the process of compassion is just a feeling. It's in here and it's in here. There have been so many cases where stories have not gotten me where I needed to go, that I myself have begun to try and pay more attention to them. And I believe that there's definitely a case to be made for helping to bring about a little bit of internal quiet by not entertaining the stories all the time. But that's just me. Feel free. I mean, I certainly can't speak for anybody else, and but thank you for the thought. Just as valid as anything I might have come up with. So anybody else?
Hi, Jim, it's Lois.
Hi, Lois. How are you?
I'm doing really well.
Move so I can see where you're at. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I don't know. Okay. So it's really an interesting thought about stories. And where do we make the okay, so I consider sort of my experiences to be my personal story in a sort of way. And I find others' experiences, when they share them, it helps me to understand what I'm experiencing because of what they've gone through or because of how they've dealt with something. And in my stories, I think it helps explain some things and some concepts and why how we relate to these things. So I'm curious, when you are talking about stories, are you talking about sort of the narrative that we put to what's going through our brain at a certain time, or the judgments we make about something? Are you thinking more along those lines, or us trying to find answers when there are no answers? Because I've had plenty of situations where there was no answer, particularly in dealing with my kid's illness. There was no answer, no right way or wrong way that I should respond, and I just had to do the best that I could. So just maybe your thoughts on that.
Yes, all of the above. Yeah, we're kind of sort of wandering around this and remembering that we were talking, the original subject is mindfulness of dharmas. And here, I guess where we've floated off around is that these phenomena, a major portion of these phenomena include our stories about them. Now, they're not the only portion of that phenomena. Like for instance, a puppy. A puppy is a phenomena. There's no two ways about that. But that phenomena exists in both a physical and a non-physical. You know, it's that ineffable thing that makes a puppy a puppy. And I don't know of any other way. But you know, it's so the story of the puppy is there, but the puppy is there. And the story can be separate from the puppy, and the puppy can be separate from the story. And the stories can be changing constantly and everything. So that's, I guess, you know, we got to keep that in mind is that when we start talking about these stories, we're talking about the stories as they wrap around and interweave within these manifestations that we call phenomena. And remember that a phenomena will last exactly as long as everything that's necessary continues to manifest itself. Someday that which allows me to manifest myself as this person on this screen, you know, it's not, you know, eventually it's going to be to the point where I won't be able to, things will start headed towards entropy so quickly that I won't be able to shovel them all together anymore. And that'll be the end of that, you know, but who's to know what our existence is after that? I don't even want to get into that. All I know is that all I'm talking about at this point is that we're wrapping these stories around the various phenomena that we come up with, the various manifestations. I don't know. I don't know. Years and years ago, I was going to a therapist, and it was talk stuff. And he said to me one day, "Are you getting anything out of this?" And I said, "You know, I spend days and days and days reminding myself not to come up with stories. And then when I come to visit you, I have to come up with stories." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I kind of thought that was the case, you know." So, man, human beings are story-making people, but I can't speak about other creatures, you know. I don't know if they have stories of their own selves. So anyway, anybody else?
Hi, this is Cherie.
Hi,
Can you
Shirley.
see me? I don't know if I
Yes,
sit
yes.
here.
I have so many bad eyes, so I'm looking for the hand.
Okay. I hate standing, so can I sit?
By all means.
So someone at this retreat actually gave me a book several years ago, and it was about changing our stories. And I found it incredibly useful. And I feel like stories come back to what you originally brought up as so important to everything, which is interbeing and impermanence. And I feel like my story was created as I grew up, and it served me at different parts of my life. But the story is just, I feel like it's a single snapshot. It's not necessarily the full understanding of what actually occurred. And I feel like the Dharma has helped me be able to look at my stories and say, is that story working for me? Or do I need to kind of change my story? And that's where I feel like the impermanence of stories even comes in as an important thing to move with through life in order to, because we're not permanent, we're constantly changing. And the idea of interbeing and impermanence with stories, because I also think stories are so magical. Like as humans, I think we want understanding. We crave understanding. We crave, security of knowing things for sure. And so I think stories will always play a role in trying to fulfill that desire to make sense of things. And I think creativity is a great place to make sense of things, and I think stories are too. But I do think that stories often, or at least my stories, definitely reached a point where they were not helping me. And there's some of them that are just so deeply ingrained that they're actually hurting me now. And so I do feel like this sense of looking at my stories as impermanent in themselves, and I guess trying to see my stories from different perspectives as a way of interbeing. So I don't know if any of that makes sense, or if that's just me trying to make sense of things again.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And thank you so very much for that. As a matter of fact, I think in the long run, that's one of the things that we risk when we get so involved in our stories is that we risk taking that snapshot and turning it and taking it as permanence, as the perfect example that always comes to me. My sister, I am 70 years old. My sister is 74, and yet she will inevitably impose upon us ideas of relationships of when I was 10 and when she was 14, and because that's her sense of permanence. She needs this sense of permanence. Human beings really need it, and it takes a certain amount of effort in order to try it. But again, you notice when you talk about what you're talking about, when you talk about understanding your stories and using your stories to maybe even get somewhere with yourself or with your habit energy, understand that you're doing the very first thing, which is paying attention. That's it. You're paying attention. You're paying attention to the stories. You're paying attention to the phenomena. You're paying attention to what holds them all together. How many families do you know where the only thing that holds the family together is the stories? I don't know whether that's good or bad. I haven't a clue. Anybody else?
Hi, Jim. It's been a long time. I have to say that when I started, maybe 9 years ago, I was a Sunday goer and you were my teacher. And I didn't leave you because I didn't like you as a teacher, but Saturdays ended up better for me. So thank you for giving me my start. I thought of a couple things and you were just talking about it. It was synchronousness, I guess. But I think sometimes, this part of the story is having the purpose, and it's not the story itself. It's the purpose of who you're sharing the story with. I'll give an example so that that's not confusing. When I lost my father, I was 6. And my grandmother came to be with us in New Jersey. And my grandmother bought The Real Mother Goose, which is filled with stories. And so it wasn't so much any one story in The Real Mother Goose. It was her purpose in connecting with me and giving me stories that I would remember, because I now give every child who is born The Real Mother Goose. And I have found the original, so it's meant a lot to me. So her intention then was, here's the book, but my intention is connect with you and try to heal your sadness. She also told me stories about my father that I would carry on forever. And I told her stories of my father. So it became much bigger than the story itself. During COVID, my niece fell and she had a concussion. And I gave her the app Calm. And we read The Velveteen Rabbit. And so I had that long distance connection with her, not Zoom, just over the phone, no FaceTime, nothing. Just Eva and me talking about The Velveteen Rabbit. But it was much more than The Velveteen Rabbit. It was my purpose in connecting with my family all in the Chicago area and me in Milwaukee, but with Eva, who had just had an accident and was afraid and needed something other than flowers to say, we're thinking of you. I wanted to give her the Calm app so she could hear these stories, anyone she wanted, to fit her purpose. So I'm talking about a couple of things, the power of the story itself, but also the intention before you sit with somebody and actually share a story. So like others, I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll go in a couple of different directions. Number one with that is that we must, first off, we must always remember and never forget the limitations of our stories, of our memories. Every time, neuroscience tells us that we create a memory, and then every time we trot that memory out after that, it's changed just a little bit. And it's easiest to understand that if you know that you put the memory down in basis of context, and then when you trot it back out a year, a week, a month, a year, or 5 years later, and you trot it out, and you go over it and you put it back in a different context. So we must always remember that our stories and our stories are always changed through our memories. But now I would like to come back and address and come back to my dear friend Cornelia, because I've been rummaging it around in the back of my brain as we've been going along, and the most wonderful thing that came to me is that your music is stories. And more than that, your music, the stories in your music can help me feel the emotions that you are feeling. You can create with your voice and with your instruments a feeling, an emotion. And that's one of those places where there's no substitute for that story. That's probably the most wonderful thing about human beings is that when we can sit with each other and share those share those emotions brought together by their stories. So thank you for bringing that. And again, I'm remembering back one of my old trite old stories about maybe good, maybe bad. You know, we never know. Is something good? Is something bad? The business of trying to drop the judgments is so that we know that things are not, just because it's not good for me doesn't mean it's not good for somebody else. But again, there we go. It's it all gets so confusing. So anybody else?
Yes, hi, Jim. My name is Bridget.
Hi, Bridget.
Hello. Thank you so much for your transmission in your talk. It was so, as you said, it just said it can be so confusing, but it seemed to me very clear what you were saying. And I want to check something out with you because for me it was very, something arose, in the mindfulness of my body and my feelings, very powerful. And I wanted to check my understanding of what you were saying. At first, I had almost the feeling of just this abyss opening up. When you were speaking of the indeterminacy of the word Dharma, the translation of the word Dharma, as path or law in the colonial kind of understanding, and or kind of a way. And that's always how I've thought of Dharma, as sort of a way or a path. But it seemed to me that you were pointing to a different understanding, which almost seemed to me to be no path. There is only phenomena arising, and mindfulness of Dharma is simply to be aware of phenomena. And it seemed to me that there was a sense that there is no path. There's no sort of no Dharma in the sense of doctrine or teaching. It seems to me that as we were talking about stories, I was thinking maybe those understandings of Dharma really kind of are a sense of a story that has to do with judgment. Law, of course, has everything to do with judgment. Or path, it seemed to me, a way that's sort of laid out ahead of you. But there is, it seemed to me, in what you were saying, no path. There is simply what is arising. And that was initially very disturbing and then unfolded into something like exhilaration and then a kind of settledness, which is what I'm kind of feeling now. So I'm wondering, was my understanding aligned to what you were expressing?
Yes, absolutely. I started off these if you'll forgive me, these requests come from Paul. Normally we sit and we have coffee and we meditate on Monday mornings, and the requests like these come usually. I hope I could depend on you for a Dharma talk. Oh yeah, sure. No, and what's the subject? And I scribble it down. In this particular instance, 2 days later, I was thinking to myself, this word Dharma is really, really slippery. And about 2 days later after that, I thought to myself, no, this is not slippery. This is subtle. This is the subtleness of being of the human condition. This is the subtleness of the of being human. So yeah, and it means all of that and more. When I take refuge in the Dharma, then I'm taking refuge in the laws and in the teachings that my teachers and the Buddha have brought to me. But by the same token, again, I'm also accepting the fact where this has come to for me is that quite often as I sit in my daily meditations, I bring myself to this place. The only way I know how to do it is to connect to my breath, and my breath helps me to remove myself from the stories. If there's another way, I'd be glad for people to tell me about it. But coming back to my breath helps me drop the stories. And at that point, I feel like I'm looking into that through a little window of that ultimate universe. And for brief moments, a little bit at a time, I can smile and I can just follow my breath, and I can know that I'm living in the present moment. I'm experiencing the world just exactly as it is in the here and now. Right about then, I say, hey, look, I'm doing it. Whoops, it all fell apart, because the instant I recognize it, it all starts to fall apart. So it's the experience. It's living the moment, living the world moment by moment and instant by instant with as little judgment as possible, at least in my opinion. So
Thank you for sharing that gift.
Jim, this is Colleen again. This is an observation, not a question. Maybe it's a judgment or a story, I don't know, but. When you speak, I see your mouth moving, but I feel like you speak to us straight from your heart, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I greatly appreciate that. I do. I try to understand. I try to understand the subject of what I've been asked to talk about, and I try to understand it as well as I can. And I just and I have so many times it starts off from I do not know. I just ran across that. I don't know how many of you are fans of Star Trek: The Next Generation, but the other day I caught our android friend saying, I do not know is the basis for all scientific understanding. And I thought to myself, yes, you're right. If I do not come to a subject with a sense of I do not know, then how do I know what I'm missing or not missing? It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to have for me as my body continues to deteriorate and I spend more and more time homebound. I can still have these wonderful things. This wonderful opportunities to be with you folks and to do the research that I need to do. So, anybody else?
Hi, Jim. I'm way over here.
Oh yeah, hi.
I've always appreciated your Dharma talks. I've heard a few before, and I've seen you on the South Side years ago. So thank you for all you've done for us. I wanted to add my take on this issue around stories and the upside or downside of stories. And as someone who's studied Buddhism for a long time, I'm also studied psychology for a long time, and psychotherapists are fond of saying we all need a story. And they present all this research on how we need stories to give our life meaning and purpose and order. And while at the same time I'm taking very seriously the Buddhist messages around the problems with stories. So being a fan of the middle path, I'm going to try to walk it briefly with some words, which are always unreliable. I think when Buddhists talk about stories, they usually are referring to the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And we all know that those stories can often be hijacked by the ego. We tell stories to make ourselves look good. While I'm trying to say something true right now, I'm also probably, there's a part of me that wants to say something that will make you think I'm a good guy and likable and smart. And so the stories we tell are always fraught in that regard. So I think that the importance of the Buddhist message in this regard is to be very careful with how we hold our stories and how much we believe our stories. So the question seems to me, do we believe our own bullshit kind of thing? And to hold our stories with some, and this is why I appreciate your sense of humor about your own positions, is to know, of course, everything we may say may be silly. I'm always torn when I stand up to talk in front of a group because part of me thinks, who the hell needs to hear what you're saying? And then I also know that we appreciate sometimes hearing what others have to offer.
Yeah.
So it's fraught when we open our mouths, which is why I like eating in silence so much. So there's the Buddhist reminder that our stories are often bullshit, they're often self-serving, they're often in service of our egos rather than, but there's also this other message, which is stories can inform us, stories can guide us. So I think the question is about our relationships to stories and how we hold our stories. But not to be ashamed of the fact that we tell stories, because if, for example, in my Dharma discussion group, if those folks weren't willing to tell their stories, I wouldn't feel more connected to them. And some of their stories might have had elements of ego in them, they might have had elements of bullshit in them, they might, as do all of mine. But this is the world we live in. To be humans, try to connect with each other, we have to say something. That's one of the ways we connect. So it's just very fraught, and so I'm just going to fall on the Somerset Mom's razor's edge here. I'm not going to choose to believe my own stories. I'm not going to give up stories. I'm just going to dance on that edge, and I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. I agree with you. The one place that I might diverge a little bit is that yes, basically we might be thinking that we're dealing with stories about ourselves and things of that nature, but when they're turned around and we're telling stories about the other, we're actually creating the other with stories. And of course, that's the whole business. We don't even want to get involved in with the ego there. I don't know. I just, from my point of view, is I would like to think that as I became a little bit more aware and a little bit less insistent on my ego, the stories become a little bit softer. But you're absolutely correct. We take the middle path, and know that we will never forget. We will probably never be able to completely suspend ourselves from the stories. But again, the question, and I all the way back to over an hour ago, was are they suiting your purposes? And if they're suiting your purposes, if you want, tell yourself any stories you want, if they're not doing anybody any harm, and if they're suiting your purposes, who am I to tell you that you shouldn't be telling yourself that? I don't know. For myself, as I'm getting older and I'm getting to be more of a minimalist, I think is what I'd like to say. And of course, one of the things about these stories is what, as we've discussed in other times and places, the 10,000 Dharma gates, right? You got something as simple, something like this impermanence or this interbeing, and we have to discuss it over and over and over and over and over and over again, 10,000 times, because there may very well be someone who hasn't gotten it the 9,999 other times, and they're looking for just that perfect way for them to understand. That being said, where would kids be if we couldn't teach them that their feelings and their hearts, what's in their heart and their mind is essentially what's in other people's hearts and minds. You have feelings, they have feelings, so we all have stories, but that doesn't mean we have to let them run rampant. And we should surely be aware of the harm or good that we would like for them to be doing. So.
I'm Tony. We never met.
Hi, Tony. We've met now.
It's my first time into learning about how to change and how to have more compassion. Talking about stories is, I'm in a very strong 12-step group. I've been in it for 30 years. And we tell our stories. And when we tell our stories, we're trying to open up someone else to probably let their story out a little bit so they can find a better place. And stories for me are extremely important. I have to be careful with the ego. You know, I can't change the word ego, but we used to say edging God out, and we're trying to be God with our ego when we tell the story. But the story basically is extremely important to me because I could tell a story and it might open up another person and may change his life, and we have a connection. So I really appreciate you talking about stories and how important they are. Usually when I tell my story, it's not for me. It's for everybody else to try to say, do I have something similar in that? And what should I do with that? And I think every story is told at a certain time, and we're not in charge of telling that story. It just takes place. And I don't know if you have a comment on that or not, but I'm sure everybody here has told the story and wondered, should I have told that story? Or was it bullshit and I needed to belong, you know? And you have to be careful with your stories. So that's all I have to offer. And
Yeah, absolutely. Boy, but again, as I said earlier, one of the problems is that comes around is our deciding that the way it is in this particular instant is the way it's going to be forever, for always, even for the next 10 hours. Now, our dear friend Pema Chodron says that she has people who regularly come to her and say, Ani Pema, I have pain. I have pain that hurts like no one has ever hurt before. And I'm interested in this because of my dealing with chronic pain. And Ani Pema says at this point, she puts on her best Tibetan nun smile and she smiles at them and says, you're wrong. And she goes on to explain about there's only a given number of ways that a human body can malfunction and hurt. But what's different, what's infinite, ad infinitum, is the stories we tell about our hurt. The stories we tell about our pain, about our physical, mental, or emotional pain. Doesn't make any difference. And it's that we have this commonality of being human. But then we go ahead and we make up our stories about in order to be special. And yeah, okay. I guess I've got no arguments for anyone who's thought things through, and that's all. This is get in contact with your stories, connect with your stories, or connect with your phenomena. I guess I didn't really mean for all of this to fall off onto stories, although it's the phenomena and the way we interact with them. Yes, it's all the same. So, but okay, anybody else? Okay, I've got somebody in front and somebody in back.
Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
I'm Cass.
Hi, Cass.
I think there might be probably many kinds of stories, but there's the one story, mindfulness of story, that we try, which is probably impossible to get an accurate story of our lives. But I think there's also the creative story, which can show possibility, what we're capable of, what we can aim towards. And I think those are different kinds of stories.
I'll go along with that.
Yeah. Any comment, Jim?
No.
About creative stories and showing possibilities.
No, like for instance, as I noticed that Cornelia has closed out. but she and her music, or music is a perfect example of stories. And that maybe even they're stories that serve a purpose. They serve their purpose. I would like to bring one thing I'd like to bring out. See, this is I got 2,600 years worth of backstory. Okay, so now I get to bring this one out, which is to a certain extent the fabric that we create of our phenomena and our stories. These are the raft that move us to the other shore. Now, you remember our story about the raft that moves us to the other shore? When we get to the other shore, we don't want to pick it up and carry it around. We want to understand that these stories about Buddhism, these stories about the things that, and the understandings we have about the dharmas and the phenomena and stuff, these are the raft. And you determine what the other shore is like. I know what I'm determining. I am becoming so, let's see. I am finding few things more important in my world lately than coming back to my breath and sitting quietly with myself. As a person who did not know how to be with myself for decades and decades and decades, and it was the stories that were telling me that were tearing me apart, and it was the phenomena that I was creating, that was being built up around me, that I was tearing up and tearing down. So now in today's world, I simply try and watch it and see it and experience it and do the best that I can. So, anybody else?
Hi, Jim, it's Ro again. I just wanted to say, it's so important that we're talking about stories. So however it is that we went down this path, I think it's powerful because if we look at it from the collective, the larger collective unconscious or conscious mind, there's a huge issue right now about whose story are we telling? And the question is, you've left my story out. You haven't listened to, you didn't even know my story.
Right.
And how important, I think, what you're talking about in terms of allowing ourselves this kind of discussion of another person's perspective, however we might assign it to not have any value or meaning as it relates to our comfort zone. I think it's very powerful that we still maintain, our relationship to part of the Dharma is having to drop our stories, not drag it around across not drag the raft too far, because there is an abyss, and that's a beautiful abyss. However, anxiety producing, So anyway, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for all the story talk.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Hi, and thank you for your talk. My name is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
I think what I wanted to say was that this feeling that I've been having recently has to do with experiencing phenomenon as it's happening. And the discomfort of the story that really, like, I'm the director of the film, and sometimes the other actors I'm working with know their parts, and sometimes they are like going way off script, and I have to, wrangle them to get back to like saying the right things and performing correctly. And it causes me a lot of frustration. It causes me a great deal of anxiety and stress, because I'm not experiencing phenomenon as it's arising. I'm experiencing the discomfort of how that phenomenon doesn't match with the script that I have predicted. And so I just wanted to say that's what I heard you speaking about. The Dharma is this, we acknowledge that we are not ever living in pure phenomena. We are always living with a layer of our own experience buffering that phenomena, and that a higher recognition includes saying, yes, I wrote this script for the day and nobody's following it, and I have anxiety and frustration about it, and wow, look at what's really happening. If I drop this story, how else can I experience this? On and on. And maybe I can't have that present moment interaction with phenomenon the way that I crave it, with the capacity to accept it as it comes, if I don't have my practice of really narrowing it down to just, well, what is really happening right now? Well, I am breathing, Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. There's a good portion of all of these stories is to make us comfortable in the phenomena. Just as an example, just as an example, someone who sees someone else, they see another person on the street, and that person that they see on the street doesn't conform to the first party's ideas about sexuality or sexual appearance. Well, somehow that person, the person of the party of the first part is really, 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 really uncomfortable, and this person begins to tell themselves stories in order to become more comfortable. I think that's mostly what the vast majority of our stories are about. These phenomena, they're uncomfortable. And not too many people can just be with the uncomfortables. No, I should say, it seems as if people need to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness. And I guess the best way I could point that out, and it's only because I had such an amazing teacher, but to sit in my garden with my dear friend Paul, and we will decide that it will be perfect however it works itself out. So we don't insist on a story. This is the way it'll be perfect however it works its way out. So
I want to thank Jim for his time and his wisdom. Always a wonderful part of our retreat, Jim. Thank you for your time and your expertise. And yes, we can all feel you speaking from your heart, and that's a great share. So thank you very much.
thank you all. Thank you for having me.
You're missing the wave, Jim.
Oh, okay.